first, I want to welcome you all to 2022's Pride Power Hour. We are super excited for the panel that we have today. Basically, the theme that we came up with for this year is LGBTQ Conversations Across Generations. And the reason we came up with that theme is because the queer community has had a very long journey over the years, and we've accomplished so much, but there's still a lot of things that we have not accomplished. And we thought that it would be great to bring in panelists from different generations who could share their perspectives about their own coming out stories and their experiences. And we're super excited to have a couple external panelists joining us this year, as well as a couple internal panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and tee it off to our panelists to introduce themselves. I also would like to introduce my co-host for this year, Paul Busby. And we're super excited to get this started. So first, I'm going to pass it over to who we all affectionately know as Wheels.
Hey, everybody. I am Wheels. I'm a senior vice president on the revenue team, been with Prove for 5 years, and just digging every day. Do you want me to go on to other things, or everybody's just going to introduce themselves first?
Yeah, I think we'll have everyone just do a quick intro, and then, yeah, we'll dive into some more. So
Awesome.
Let's go ahead and pass it over to Chase.
Hey guys, I'm Chase. I have been with Prove for about a year. I work for the revenue team, and I am very excited to be part of this panel this year. It should be a really good conversation.
Awesome. We'll go over to Meredith.
Hey everyone, it's lovely to chat with y'all this morning. My name is Meredith Gleitz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the policy manager at One Colorado, which is an LGBTQ+ advocacy organization in Colorado.
Awesome. And Giselle.
Hello, so glad to be here. My name is Giselle. I use she, he, and they pronouns. I am a gender health psychologist, and I'm currently working at the Transgender Health Clinic at the San Francisco VA Medical Center.
Awesome. And of course, cannot forget my co-host, Paul, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. So Paul Busby on the executive team here at Prove. I've been with the firm for about 18 months now. I'm looking to be very much educated by the panel we have today, and be an increasing ally to the community and being a better person in the workplace and at home.
Awesome. And obviously, my name is Lexi. I've been with Prove now for 3 years. I'm part of our diversity and inclusion council that we've been trying to build up. So I look forward to continuing to work on that and bring more events like this to Prove. All right. And then just real quick for anyone, as we're having a discussion, if you have any questions, please Slack those directly to Tyler. And then we will start to incorporate those questions in between the discussion. Okay. All right, so we are going to get started with the first question. So basically, can you share your experience about coming out in your personal life and professional life? And additionally, if you want to touch on what was the climate like surrounding the queer community during the time that you came out, and maybe how that might have impacted your experience. So let's go ahead and start with Wheels.
So you start with the elder statesperson, right?
Absolutely. You have a lot to share with us youngins. We're excited.
So I came out in the late 70s, which I think many people on this panel and in the audience weren't even born yet. You know, coming out isn't something that you just wake up and say, hey, I'm going to come out today. It's a very long process. It's an internal process that you have to go through, and that you have to come to an acceptance in yourself because you are different. Particularly back when I came out, it wasn't a topic of conversation like it is today. I grew up overseas. I grew up in Asia and in the Middle East, and those were clearly not countries that it was an accepted way of life. When I came back to the States, that's when I finally decided that I needed to find a community. And I did that through the Boston Alliance of Gay and Lesbian Youth. And then I decided to come out to my family. there were good ways that it happened and not so good ways that it happened. When I came out to my father, I was driving in his car with him. Now, my father is a South Boston Irish Catholic dude. And I said, you know, Dad, I got to tell you, I'm gay. And he said, I'm so happy you're happy. And I said, no. I mean, like, I'm a lesbian. And he almost drove off the road. But he asked questions. You know, he asked me how I felt about myself. He asked me how I came to the evolution. So that was a great experience. And I was very surprised at my dad. Now, my mom was a different story. When I told my mother, her response was, I know, I was just waiting for you to figure it out. You know, that took the wind out of my sail. It takes a lot to tell somebody and to come out to somebody. And for that to be the response, it was like a gut punch. There was no room for an additional conversation that happened. So that was a difficult one. Now, we got past that, but you know, those are the good ways to respond to somebody and not so good ways to respond to somebody when they come out. You know, I could go on for a long time about other parts of my coming out and the two stages, but in part that, you know, asking questions when somebody comes out to you is really powerful. Stifling the conversation by saying, I knew that already, is not.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on, you know, being raised in different areas in different countries. And so I'd really like for Meredith to hop in here because I know that she lived in Ecuador for a while. And I think different parts of the world have very different reactions to the queer community. And I do think like kind of where you come out and where you were raised, it really does have a strong impact on your identity and just how comfortable you are with having those conversations. Meredith, I'll pass it over to you if you want to jump in.
Yeah, totally. I really love the way you put it, Wheels. I think that it is an internal process of self-acceptance first. And so I think when we talk about coming out, you often, I often thought of it as kind of like a linear, one time you do it, you're out, and now I'm out, and that's it. But I come out to every single person that I meet every single time that I meet somebody new or in a new environment. And so I think that it's a continuous thing that we're doing all the time. But I definitely did, you know, come out to myself first. And I think growing up in Texas and kind of a more religious area of the country and raised in a religious family, I think it took a long time for me to get over a lot of the internalized homophobia that I had and to actually come out to myself even as the first step. And then once I started to feel comfortable enough to kind of bring others in and come out to my friends and family more so, it was a really hard and difficult but really beautiful experience. And I was really grateful for the acceptance that I felt. And then I moved to Ecuador 2 days after I came out to my parents. So nothing like waiting for the buzzer beater on that one, but I moved to Ecuador and I was not out to my family, my host family while I was there. I was not out to hardly anybody in my community, really only the other Peace Corps volunteers that I was serving with. And that was really difficult to kind of ride that yo-yo of I'm out in some places, not in others, and trying to navigate who I felt like coming out to at what times and in what spaces. I will say though, to the point of like geographical differences or like perceived cultural differences, I think one of the most shocking experiences that I've had as a queer woman, this is a random story, I promise I'll tell it fast, but this man started catcalling me and my partner as we're walking down the street, not realizing that we were together. And so I reached down and held her hands. And that man found us when we were on the beach, hanging out like half an hour later, and gave me one of the most beautiful apologies I've ever heard in my life. He was so remorseful. He went on this big speech about how love is love. And so sometimes it's important to remember that if you leave space for people, sometimes you can be pleasantly surprised by how people will receive you, even if it's not what you might immediately expect from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been catcalled plenty of times, you know, walking down the street with my partner, and I never received an apology. So I don't know, maybe us Americans need to take a lesson from Colombians. I don't know. All right, Chase, I'd love for you to jump in here and share your experiences.
Sure. I think, I mean, I should say, fortunately, I did not have to come out in the 70s. So I will say that my experience has been, I mean, I've been very, very lucky to have the support system that I've had, and I'll obviously go into that. But I'll just say, up until high school, I didn't know Pride Month was a thing. I didn't know that you could go to these awesome parades. In fact, I've never even been to a Pride parade, and I'm planning to go this weekend. So, I mean, I grew up in a very small town in the mountains, Granby, for those of you in Colorado. Didn't know a gay person until I was in high school. So for a very, very long time, I, was very confused. So why don't I like these beautiful girls that are all around me? Come on. So, for a long time, I had this issue of like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, because I've never been exposed to these things. I've never had conversations about the LGBTQIA plus community until I was in high school. And on top of that, huge athlete in high school, ran track through high school and college. And, ultimately one day I was a freshman in college, and I'm pretty young still. So I'm just out of college. So this wasn't very long ago. I was like, this is so stupid. I feel this way. I'm in athletics. Again, nobody that I knew was gay on this team. There were 100 people. I didn't quite understand what was going on. And I was like, you know what? I've dealt with my internal battles long enough. I don't want other youth, people that are much younger than me, or athletes to feel this way anymore. So I think it was Valentine's Day, a perfect day to come out to everybody. I decided I want to see, I wish I was in high school and I saw this amazing LGBTQIA plus athlete going around and being really fast and cool and a tough athlete. So, I think I posted on Instagram, which again, in the 70s, you couldn't just come out on Instagram like that. But I think it was a very meaningful moment for me because, and I'd like to add, I went to school in Kansas. So it was a pretty progressive school, but I was still surrounded by a lot of people who didn't quite understand or have much experience with the LGBTQIA plus community. So ultimately, I decided along with that, and this is attributed a lot to Prove and Wheels being a mentor throughout my time last year, is I'm not ever going to hide that part about me again, because why would I limit myself over something that I don't think is my core identity? It's who I decide to hold hands with, who I decide to date. But at the end of the day, I'm going to put myself forward. And luckily, I've found a very, very good organization where you are welcomed to do things like that and to express yourself. So I'm very, very lucky to have the support system and people around me continued even after college.
Absolutely. I think the people who struggle the most with coming up, because they just don't have that support system, they just haven't found that community yet, or even more so, they don't really have a model of who to go off on. A lot of queer youth, I think, struggle with that. Like, they are always looking for that role model of like, how do I come out? And I think up until very recently, we really didn't have that. We didn't have a lot of queer celebrities. We didn't have a lot of queer actors and actresses and musicians. And so like, who do you base that off of, if you don't have someone to look to? So yeah, I think that's really interesting. Giselle, would love to get your input on this question.
Yeah, it's been lovely to hear as I'm listening to the three of you speak about your experiences. And it made me think, number one, about just the varying degrees of outness, that there's not just, one thing like you mentioned, Meredith, you come out once, but even two people, you might have varying degrees of outness, even to one particular person. And then when you count all the people in your life or all the settings that you're in, and the other thing I was thinking about was what you just talked about, Lexi, like the support that you have and how much that makes a difference. So for myself, I came out in my first year of graduate school when I was living in New York City. And that's when I came out. Like you were talking about, Michelle, what really helped was I became part of an organization called Jewish Queer Youth. I grew up in an ultra-Orthodox Jewish family. So while I am a millennial, I do also think about different intersectional identities, because my experience as a millennial coming out could be so different from someone else's, depending on the culture that they're raised in, the religion of their family. I did come out to my family soon after that as bisexual / pansexual. I am still not out to my family as non-binary, and I don't know if I will ever come out to them, because number one, they have no idea what that is. Number one, there was very little understanding of queer identities in that ultra-Orthodox Jewish community that my family is from. They don't really understand what that identity is. I think it would be quite confusing. If I did decide to medically transition to some extent, I'd probably have to have some discussion, especially if I'm experiencing changes like voice changes. But it is something that I'm not particularly interested in doing unless I really have to. And that's because I don't see the benefit in it. To me, what was important to me is that my family understand that I am LGBTQ. They don't, in my opinion and from my experience, they don't need to know the specifics. We already struggle a lot with that particular aspect. Even just them knowing that I'm in the LGBTQ community is very difficult for them. And it's not a conducive space. So I also hold that coming out is not for everyone. It's not the best decision for everyone. It actually can be not a good decision for some people, depending on who the person is. The decision to even hold someone's hand, I was thinking, Meredith, that's coming out in that moment that you held your partner's hand. And that's such an individual decision that LGBTQ folks have to make on a daily basis. So.
Yeah, I agree, Giselle. We have to make conscious decisions, right? It's not natural. It's not something that we can just say, we can just do. It's what's my environment? Who's around me? What's the implication going to be? Is there going to be harm? Am I going to get heckled? Am I going to get harassed? That's the unfortunate thing, is that we always have to be thinking about our surroundings before we even can be who we are, right?
When we were talking on the prep call the other day, it was just, everybody assumes you're heterosexual until you have to find some mechanism of saying something else, either you have a partner or whatever the kind of outcome is. And I'm a sort of straight guy, so I'm kind of learning and educating my way through this, right? And, coming out at home with your friends or in the workplace, they're all very different. Again, back to Giselle's comments, it's a personal thing, and what comfort you have and who you think your support network is. It's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to chime in for a second on that point. I think the fact that queer identifying people have to come out is messed up in itself. I mean, I think ideally I don't want to come out to people all the time. I don't want to have to say all these things due to society making me feel like I have to. I think really you can support people's coming out, and you should, but at the end of the day, I was pissed that I had to come out. I was like, why do I have to announce to the world something about myself that I don't feel like needs to be projected and announced? But people start asking questions, people start starting conversations with you. I mean, with me, it was, is this your girlfriend? Is this your girlfriend? Is like, oh, there's this pretty girl. And I was kind of fed up with that. And I think stopping those assumptions right at the root will make it a lot easier for people to be truthful with themselves. So while, of course, we all need to support, if it's our kids coming out, if it's our coworkers coming out, we must support them because that is what we do. But at the end of the day, the whole function of coming out is systematically a little messed up, in my opinion.
And Chase, I can imagine just, being in this probably traditional jock sport environment, right? Yeah, that's a big leap to make. So obviously, yeah. my mind is like a mindset of being brave to actually make that announcement, but you shouldn't have, back to your point, you shouldn't have to, but it's a weird path we're all on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Chase, I remember, sorry, Michelle, or Wills, I just wanted to hop in real quick, Chase, and say that I remember you said when you first met Wills, the question that she asked you was, do you have someone special back home? She didn't ask, do you have a girlfriend back home? She didn't make that assumption. And so I think that's something that people who are looking to become a better ally to the community just kind of make these little changes and kind of remove those assumptions. And that's support in and of itself. But sorry, Wills, go ahead and hop in. Didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I mean, being the elder states person on this, I don't remember what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
Well, it's a balancing act because on one hand, particularly at work, it's none of your business. But on the other hand, I want to bring my authentic self to work, right? Because I care about the people I work with. I spend more time with all of you than I do with anybody else in my life. So it's a hard decision to make. Bring that part. I mean, I have to tell you about my sexuality to be authentic. The straight community doesn't. And that's bizarre. I mean, I shouldn't need to do that. And it really shouldn't be, but if there's a holiday party or if there's some event and I can bring my wife, I want to bring my wife. And if I want to be authentic and I want to be truly who I am, then I need to be out, so to speak. And that's kind of an odd scenario. I mean, Paul, you don't have to come in and say, state your sexuality, right?
Like it's absolutely nuts. And like, I think even from my perspective, like I would always be, I'm fearful of saying the wrong thing to a gay person, right? It's just minefield in my mind of how we kind of explore this. And all I want to be is educated. I want to understand the outcomes. But even a silly thing is, oh, have you got a boyfriend or girlfriend? And it's actually the opposite. I'm like, oh shit, I think I've said the wrong thing. But it's just, you shouldn't have, just be who you want to be in the office. And if you want to share that, if you don't want to share that, that's a personal choice. But I would say from my perspective, I'm nervous, and I could probably speak on lots of people's behalf. Like, you just don't want to say the wrong thing. You're not looking to insult anybody. You're not looking to make somebody feel uncomfortable. You just want them to be who they can be and represent who they want to be whenever, in whatever environment it may be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think from my vantage point, Paul, it's nice to hear you say that. And I think I feel the same way. Like, I want to be able to have an authentic conversation with a coworker, with a friend, and not have it be awkward too. And like, neither of us are on a different playing field than the other. And just because you're not part of the community doesn't mean that you can't ask questions and learn, and vice versa. There are identities that you hold that I don't have. And so I would just say we're on the same boat there.
Yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You don't want to have to constantly come out to coworkers and to friends, but at the same time, you want to bring your authentic self to the workplace, because how can we do our work to the best of our ability and be passionate about our work if we're coming into an environment where we don't feel like we can be authentic, we don't feel like we can truly be ourselves. So I really think it is on the burden of the workplace to create that really safe and inclusive environment, and to let individuals know who self-identify as part of the queer community that they can bring that part of themselves to whatever extent that they feel most comfortable, and that they're not going to be judged for it. And their coworkers. I think that a lot of times people are just worried about saying the wrong thing, Paul, as you said, and so we just don't say anything and we just don't have these conversations. And then it kind of creates this explicit, like, kind of taboo idea of we're not going to talk about these things in the workplace, but really we should be having these conversations on a regular basis, and not just when it's Pride Month. You know, these should be conversations we're having every day with coworkers, with family, with friends, so long as you feel comfortable having those conversations.
And just to add, even within the scope of the folks we've got on here now, everybody's, I think, represented in a different state or wherever people are located, and there's just different rules and regulations that are impacting people's lives in the state they live in. There's no clarity across, the country. So that also has impact on the environment that you live in every day as well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. All right, before we go on to the next question, Tyler, did we have any questions come through on Slack that we want to weave in here? And I guess that's a no. So let's go on to the next question. Paul, if you want to tee up this this question and go ahead and pick on a panelist to respond.
I'm going to jump down here actually, because I think it's more relevant. Look, it's more about, how do we effectively build the bridge, and across community. We kind of, even talked about, the concept of the acronyms of what is LGBTQ, and that is IA and plus. And I think, yes, we can all go on Google and understand what the acronyms stand for. But again, how do we educate? And again, I'm thinking more purely from a work environment here to be inclusive. Love to kind of continue the conversation, how we can all be better allies. And Giselle, I may fire it to you, because I think you've got a very unique role in what you do, and I think it may be worth spending a little bit more explaining to the folks online here about what you do for the VA. And I think that's a really interesting pathway, and that will be a sort of segmentation in. That would be great.
Of course, yeah, and I think that's such a great question. I love even just posing that question and struggling with that. With my role, so currently I am a psychologist and I do clinical work like therapy and hormone readiness evaluations and surgical readiness evaluations. But another big part of my role is effectively acting as that bridge. So I do trainings for different departments, whether it's nursing or, administrative assistants, social workers, whatever it is, clinical and non-clinical staff. And I also do quality improvement efforts. So I've done that both at the VA and at previous settings where I have trained and worked, where I've done things like in an agency or in a company's organizational structure, and as well as in the culture. And I then identify interventions that can be, whether it's training, whether it's other ways of creating an inclusive environment like policy change, creating changes in procedures, sometimes even just changing the way that we do things. For instance, we've very much switched to a gender neutral way of identifying patients. And that's been a procedural change where instead of saying Mr. or Mrs., we will say veteran. And I work with veterans, we will say veteran last name, and use they, them pronouns until we can have identified someone's pronouns. So that is an example. So I definitely think there's an aspect, I know someone mentioned it, I can't remember who, about creating the work environment, and definitely that coming from top down in terms of, creating cultural change. Even things like having a symbol. I once did a project at a previous hospital I worked at where they just put pride flags in the nursing stations. And even something like that for someone walking in to an inpatient psychiatric facility, let's say, or even just coming in for a medical appointment and to see a flag is huge. It makes such a huge difference. I'm sure other folks who are on the panel can identify with that. Walking in somewhere and seeing a flag is huge. Here at the VA, where we have our huge American flag flying, we have a huge rainbow flag flying for Pride, which is, right, so it's things like that, that you drive up to the hospital and there's a massive LGBTQ flag, and just seeing that as a veteran walking in, not sure, having experienced don't ask, don't tell in the military, being not sure what you're what you're going to expect, and then seeing this huge flag. Another thing we've done here is we have a poster for any LGBTQ identified employees, such as myself, who would be willing to be there saying, hey, here's our staff who represent you as an LGBTQ patient coming into this hospital. We have staff who have similar identities to you. And that's huge to come in and, you know, say, wow, okay, someone's going to know how to ask me about sexual health practices, not assume about the kind of sex I'm having, not assume about what my genitals look like, and so on. So definitely the procedures and like these different ways of creating an environment. I also think, you know, I was reflecting on when we had talked previously, and I do think conversations do definitely help. Of course, I hold that that's complicated because on the one hand, I'd love to say, yeah, just, you know, ask your LGBTQ coworkers all your questions. And I personally love answering questions. On the other hand, I think there is an element of holding, when are those questions invasive? When are those not appropriate for the setting? You know, for instance, you don't need to start asking about what kind of sex your patient is having when they're coming in for like an ear exam or something like that. Like, it's just not, it's invasive at that point. It's not relevant. But if they're coming in for general, let's say, screening, or you're talking about sexual health practices, then that would be appropriate. And the ways that you ask it would be appropriate. So I hold that there's some complexity. There's almost like a part of me that wishes that there was someone who could also be sort of like in that role, because we have, for instance, in the settings I work in, I serve as a consultant as well, where folks can come to me and say, hey, I'm not sure how to navigate this that came up, or I don't know how to frame this question. I sense that it can come across the wrong way. I just don't have the words for this. I think most of the time, it shouldn't be that sensitive of a thing to say, hey, I'm so curious. I know, you know, you say you're non-binary. I don't know a lot about that. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And you mentioned medical transition. What does that mean for non-binary people? I mean, this is this topic that a lot of folks don't know about. And I don't think that would be particularly insensitive to ask, but of course, in front of like a team meeting, for instance, that might be like talking about something else that might not be appropriate. So it definitely takes some judgment. So that's some of my thoughts. I know I've mentioned a lot of different things, but.
No, that's great. Thank you. You've just got a unique position in the role you have. And similar question to Meredith, and, you know, the advocacy you do and how we should think about that across the business at Prove.
Yeah, sorry, just one more thing I would want to say too is not to avoid. I think we often have, and I have this myself, when I'm not sure how to navigate something, I'll just avoid it. I might even avoid the people who represent that, because I'm like, I feel insecure about my ability to navigate this in a appropriate manner. So maybe I'm just gonna like avoid it. And I think that's not a great option either, because then you never learn, and then you don't get to interact with those folks either. So I know that's a lot of saying.
It's also human nature in some respect, but that's,
yes,
you know, we have to build around it.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think I'll hop in. I agree 100% with everything that Giselle said. I think it's really powerful how you laid it out. And it reminds me of what Wheel said at the very beginning of our conversation, how validating it was for you to have your dad ask you those questions when you came out to him. And so, of course, there's a time and a place. Of course, there's a way to ask those questions. But I do think that you know, it shows people that you care about them when you ask them a question and want to care. And so while it can be scary, you're nervous about saying the wrong thing, you know, I think with good intentions, hopefully that will also be received well. And I think that is a really powerful way for us to build bridges between allies and community. I wish I could remember this stat off the top of my head. I can't quite remember, but I know that while there's, even looking at, you know, the panelists on this call, we have quite a few queer people who may be lesbian or bi or gay, but fewer non-binary, trans representation. And I think that that's something in the queer community that often spaces can be very gay-centric, very lesbian-centric, and less inclusive to other identities, particularly when you start looking at intersectional identities of people of different races and ethnicities, other backgrounds. And so I think even within the community, we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we're being the best support system that we can for everyone. And I think that just starts with listening and trying to understand and not making those assumptions, like Giselle said, starting with they, them, until you have a confirmation one way or another, starting like Wheels did with Chase, with partner rather than boyfriend and girlfriend. It's little things like that, I mean, it's not revolutionary, but it's just changing your language ever so slightly, getting in the habit of neutral until confirmed one way or the other, or both ways. So I think little things like that to get rid of your assumptions and ask questions and foster that conversation is exactly how we build bridges between community and allies.
That's great.
Yeah, I want to touch on a couple of points. First, Giselle, the work you're doing is amazing. And when I came out of the military, I wish that there had been organizations like yours, because I came out and then I had to go back in when I joined the military. And then when I came out of the military, that had a huge impact on me. And I had no place to take that as a veteran. There was a lot of shame around having signed that document that said you have never participated in homosexual activity. And when I came out, I was still very much ashamed of myself, and there was no resource. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. In terms of the allieness and what the organization can do to support the LGBTQ community, you know, I think it's for you to ask questions, right? I do not think, from my perspective, I would not encourage people to go up to somebody and say, hey, are you gay and can we talk about it? I think it's the responsibility of the person, or you have to give the room to the person to present that, and then you can approach them and ask questions. I don't think that asking questions like, so do you sleep with men or women? You know, that's not the right way around it. It's, you know, better questions are things like, well, when you, particularly for kids who are struggling with this, you know, when you think about romanticism, you know, what do you think about? Leave the question open so that it can be, so that there's room for us to address that question in the way that works for us, instead of pinpointing the question into a specific, expecting a specific answer. So giving us room to explore the question and to answer it. But I would not recommend that you try to out somebody by asking them that question, whether they're gay or straight or anything. I think that's the right of the individual to be able to do that, and then you can approach them and ask questions.
So
I want to go ahead, Paul.
No,
okay, I'll go. I want to chime in, and to Will's point, it's leaving things open-ended, and not, even if you're not directly making an assumption about somebody, trying to give them the opportunity to speak upon themselves, regardless of presentation. I think it goes both ways. I think as a gay man myself, I suppose I'm a little bit more masculine presenting, which is why everybody always asks me if I have a girlfriend. But I think it goes on the other side of things, because as a society, we have pretty much gendered everything. You're either masculine or feminine, which I think is quite unfair if you are approaching somebody to ask questions. You know, if there's a more feminine presenting male in the office, or even if, you know, I'm trying to use loose terms, so I'm not being, you know, I'm not saying the complete opposite of what I'm trying to do. explain, you should never go up to somebody, regardless of how they present themselves, and think that that's an open invitation to ask questions. I think that's something that I've struggled with, and I think it's something that a lot of youth specifically struggle with. When you start making assumptions about how somebody acts and their sexuality, you start to push people into a corner. Even myself have made snap judgments on someone and made an assumption about sexuality that's completely wrong. So I encourage everyone here, if you're curious, like Wheels just said, don't lead the conversation with assumptions based on presentation alone, because that is unfair for the individual. And I think it completely gets rid of the whole purpose of, having a Pride Month and creating visibility.
I think, Chase, we talked about this last week in the prep call. Like, we have Pride Month, which is great because it creates transparency, but it shouldn't just be 1 month, right? This is 365 days a year, and we've got to find the mechanism for people to amplify what are the causes, the constraints, and then the conversation through the entire year, not just through June.
I have a love-hate relationship with Pride Month. I mean, I love that it creates the venue for the conversation, but I hate that it has to happen.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating after years of activism and marching in the streets and, fighting the fight. The fact that we still have to have a Pride Month is very frustrating to me.
Wills, I know we've actually got a question coming through, but before that, you've been the biggest advocate and voice within Prove. What do we need to do better as an organization? I think you have a very good lens on this. You've experienced the growth of the firm over the last 18 months. We've gone from 50 to 350 people, or whatever the number is today. What's your recommendation to management, or just broadly across the organization at this point?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think we do a very good job of supporting the LGBTQ plus community, the Asian communities, every community that we have in this organization. I don't ever feel like I'm not accepted, and that my wife wouldn't be accepted if she walked into an office with me. I think we're doing something that's very good with the DEI efforts. I think that's really important. I was thinking back to some of the things that I proposed to other folks, and there are a couple of programs that, if people are interested in, the executive team or the company may want to invest in. The Safe Zone Project has educational programs that you can take. They're $79. They're self videos that will talk how you are an ally for this community. I would say maybe offering to the Prove community, to those people who want to have access to some of those educational tools that are out there. I'd say that's the biggest one. But I've been very pleasantly accepted here without question, and it's a very comfortable place.
That's great. That's a good idea on the Safe Zone Project. We should have that as an element of our HR kind of ongoing education, selective by people if they want to learn more. I think that's great.
Right.
Okay, great. Thanks, Wills. Lexi, we have a question, right? Did that come in?
I believe Leonard would like to ask a question. So Leonard, if you feel comfortable, would you go ahead and ask the question?
Sure, yeah. And just some quick feedback. I've been at Prove for 7 months, and in the 7 months I've been here, I felt way more supported as a Black queer person than the 10 years I spent at my previous company. So Prove, y'all have been doing something great. Keep doing it. The dedication and love that you have for your people is evident, and I appreciate it so much. So that said, the conversation about, I guess, around talking with people who, aren't queer, has been really interesting. And one thing that's always kind of made me feel better having those conversations is knowing that the person I'm talking to has started to do some of the work themselves. So with that education, with the reading, with the listening, what sources have they been, reading or listening to kind of help reshape our idea, because that's going to help us no longer need to really have to come out if we're challenging these silent assumptions that we have about ourselves. Even us as queer people, we have to do it ourselves. There's a lot of internal discussions that happen that I've been privy to where it's like, wow, why I have to challenge this other person who's part of the community about some transphobic thing that they just said, or some sexist thing that they just said. It's like, you're not immune to a lot of these really icky ideas that our society is really predicated on. But educating yourself before you even have that conversation, I think can be a really powerful way to kind of help silently undo these harmful power structures. So that's more of a comment than a question, but that just was born about of the conversation.
I love that. Thanks for contributing that, because something I was thinking as well is just hearing everyone and thinking about how, on the one hand, we definitely don't want to put the onus on education on the company's LGBTQ employees. It definitely shouldn't, these conversations shouldn't, the answer shouldn't be, oh, well, let's just all have our LGBTQ employees as much, but that definitely, on the other hand, not saying, well, you can't ever talk to your LGBTQ colleagues about anything related to LGBTQ stuff. So it's definitely a nuanced, it's something that's more nuanced than just one or the other of yes, ask LGBTQ colleagues everything, or no, avoid the conversation overall. But that definitely there definitely should be this added component of having resources, of having education and training, and then questions being able to be something that is thought of what would be this person's experience of, if I ask them this question right now, what is the appropriate time and setting and the appropriate person to ask? Am I just asking this person because they appear a certain way? So there's definitely some thought to be put into it.
Yeah.
Leonard, that was a great comment. And I think it's really important for everyone here to understand that even if you are part of the queer community, you still have that responsibility to learn. I try my best to do it every day. You heard me stumble trying to explain gender roles in society because it's still something that I have not been exposed to as much in my life. So I think it's upon everybody in the society that we've created to educate themselves. And that was just a really, really good comment.
Yeah, definitely. I love the discussion that we're having, Leonard. Thank you so much for sharing, part of your experience here at Prove. And I think that's great to see that we're still kind of a small company, but the fact that we're making people feel welcome and accepted almost immediately, I think speaks a lot about the leadership at Prove. So it's great to hear from other Prove employees who can kind of share their experience with that.
Can I add one more thing, Lexi?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I also want to say, just for the precedent that Prove has created, no one asked the panelists to be on this panel and identify themselves. Right. It was all a volunteered effort. Wheels and I both reached out to marketing and said we want to do something about this. So if that says anything about how amazing Prove is and their efforts, I think that's a pretty key thing here.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I want to shift us to a slightly different topic. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, just about, Wills, you kind of touched on how you came out, you went into the military, and then you kind of had to go back in the closet, and you had a little bit of shame with that. What I really want to focus on is really let's just get real about mental health and how, being a queer woman, a queer individual, and your coming out stories and your experiences, how has that affected your mental health? And how do we go about just making that a more comfortable, this very kind of taboo thing, people really don't like asking for help, and people really don't like sharing that they are having mental health difficulties, especially when it's tied into your queer identity or other intersectional identities. So I'd love for Wills, if you want to kind of send us off on this question, then let's kind of just go around and let's just talk about it.
Sure. It is a tough part of the conversation. And I don't know for the generations today, but in my generation, it was a huge taboo, right? And also for the places I lived. And I hated myself. I wanted so badly to be like my two sisters who, had boyfriends and they went to, on dates with them and I didn't. I tried, I pretended I had boyfriends, but, it clearly wasn't in my heart. So I honestly did a lot of therapy. I did a lot of work to both before I came out to my family and after I came out of the military. The before I came out to my family was actually easier than the after the military, because the shame was so intense that that it was almost paralyzing that I had done that to myself. Because I was so proud at that point. I had done so much work to become proud of who I was, and then I betrayed myself. So I think that it's important to ask for help. The other avenue that I found was, Bagley, the Boston Alliance for Gay and Lesbian Youth, finding others in your age group, in your community, that you can share experiences with, that you can talk to. That helps mental health too, but it is a huge issue. There are kids that commit suicide every year because they're gay and they're afraid. I'm really interested in hearing Giselle's perspective on this, because mental health is your world. And it's crucial that we recognize that it is a perilous situation for kids in particular, for young people coming out, and the risk that presents to them.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing your experience. Yes, it's definitely my world. And it's, we have a mental health crisis in the United States as it is. And then when we add on being an LGBTQ identified person, and then for many folks on top of that, right, whether it's someone who's a Black trans woman, whether it's someone who's disabled, autistic, there are a lot of LGBTQ identified folks who hold many other identities as well that are also compounded, and we know that mental health disparities are huge for LGBTQ identified folks. Something that I work a lot with is a concept called minority stress. I don't know how widely known this concept is, but the idea is that when there's so much going on, discrimination, harassment, even quite honestly, even what's going on in the news. I had a friend reach out to me. It's Pride in San Francisco this weekend, and we're going to go out there. There's a trans march, there's a dyke march, there are parties, awesome things going on in San Francisco. It's a great city to be in for Pride. My friend reached out to me and said, with all the attacks going on, I'm kind of nervous to go out of Pride. Do you think we'll be safe? Even in a place like San Francisco and in California, where a lot of folks feel safer compared to other places, folks still don't feel safe. And then when you think about being in other parts, I know, Meredith, you're from Texas. I was in Texas recently, and even that experience was different for me. As I was traveling through small towns, I was a little bit like, ooh, this feels a little strange. I wonder, like, am I safe here? So just holding all of that stress, holding the stress of what's going on in the media, it impacts mental health. It gets internalized. whether that's folks have like low expectations for themselves, whether it's folks, you know, kind of like, oh, well, I'll never really have a family or have a happy life if I'm trans. I just can't see a future for myself in this world being a trans person. I've heard so many folks, patients and just folks in my trans and queer communities tell me, whether it's the shame, you mentioned the shame, there's so much competing expectations put on LGBTQ folks. And whether it's shame or low self-esteem, gender dysphoria, and then that gets translated into mental health. And that's where you see like increased depression, increased anxiety. And then there's also access. A lot of folks don't feel comfortable, have a hard time finding gender affirming or queer affirming therapists or psychiatrists, mental health care. So I think that's also something to hold, is what your LGBTQ colleague might be going through. You might not, you know, don't say gay, and now they're trying to do their work, but they're having these thoughts of, oh, will there be a time when I'm going to have to leave here, or when will my rights be taken away, or my family members love this new bill and now I feel like I can't even talk to them.
Right.
And so folks experience, and that's what I think about too, in terms of, you know, really trying to put yourself into someone else's shoes, or hold that you might not understand what might be going on for them. Maybe they're worrying, I have a wedding this weekend. Do I bring my partner or not? There's so much that might be going on. So,
well, the fear is so real, right? I mean, I wrote something on LinkedIn last night just because I was so sad about what was happening. I mean, and this is something that I think that the other communities, the communities outside of the LGBTQ plus communities could do, and that is to put yourself in our shoes. You know, what happened in Idaho hugely impacted me. I mean, I don't know if all of you are aware of what happened in Idaho, but there were, 20 some odd men that were in a U-Haul truck that were armed to the gills, that were headed to a gay pride parade to shoot up the parade because they hated gay people. I mean, that's a personal thing. That's not just something I watch on the news. That has a huge impact. The political environment, the fact that I could lose the right to be married, that I'm married right now, that's under attack. So there is a lot of fear that, it's almost like you're constantly looking over your shoulder. Am I going to lose that chip that I just got? Or am I going to lose that right that I just got over the line? So, those are things that would be really helpful for the people in our lives, I think, when you see things like that, when you hear things like that, imagine the impact that it has. And that will help, I think, our mental health as well, and to feel like you understand.
Yeah, I think in terms of mental health that parents can support, and I think I have a very new experience with this because I am very young, and I just recently, in the past 5 years, I've come out. So I think one thing that, and multiple things that parents can do, is to, from a very young age, is to form a welcoming environment. It's seriously asking those open-ended questions to your kids, but it's also creating the environment that they can bring somebody home. I'm going to be honest, and I didn't feel comfortable bringing somebody home to meet my parents until like 9 months ago. So it's still something that we, being in this community, face still every day. And I think one of the impacts that I've had with not being exposed and as welcomed as I probably should have been when I was growing up, and granted, I have a very supportive family and system now, but it's the fact that, I didn't have the teen experience of, going out late and breaking the rules with a boy or something like that. I never got that. I think a very quintessential thing that a lot of straight youth get to experience is that, you know, teen romance, that summer love, that sort of thing. And while it might sound like an unrealistic movie-esque scenario, still to this day, I find myself struggling in some relationships because I didn't have those during some of my core developmental stages of life. So I think as a parent, something that you can bring to the table, and of course you can only do so much because kids go to school, kids have friends that are rude, but if you create the precedent at home that your kid can be themselves, I think it will have a very great impact on them moving forward. I mean, if at 12 years old, it was my understanding that I could bring a boy home, a girl home, whoever home, I would have, I think, had less struggles with my mental health than I've had if that was the scenario. So I guess that's my advice for anyone who even has young kids is, again, I think making assumptions is not a great way to go about the people in your life.
Totally. Thanks for sharing that, Chase. I think one thing that I think of on the topic of mental health that we haven't talked about yet is just the importance of finding community. I think that finding people that you feel affirmed by, that you feel safe with, that you feel comfortable with, that you feel help you feel whole and your authentic self is so important. And no replacement for all the other mental health services that one might need, but I think it is a pretty crucial part of mental health, for me at least.
Yeah, it gives you a sense of belonging, right? You're not an island, you're not abnormal. You know, there are other people, and it's a community. I think that's a great point. On the topic of kids and education, that's the thing. You know, there are a couple of organizations that are really good that help parents who have children who they think might be coming out, and how do you have that conversation, or who have come out and you need to figure out how to be their close ally. One of them is PFLAG. What does it stand for? I can't even remember.
Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, I think.
Yeah, so I don't know, but PFLAG. PFLAG is a great organization, and so is GLAD, and GLAD is spelled with 2 A's. So if you're looking, if you have somebody in your life that you're trying to figure out how to support them and how to, as Chase was saying, how to make sure that their mental health is supported and strong. Those are 2 really great organizations to get connected with and learn through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, finding communities and other groups for support is one of the biggest things we should be doing on a day-to-day basis to foster these conversations and to foster that support.
Yeah.
All right. So just a reminder to people, if you have any questions, you can send those to Tyler. You can ask anonymously if you're uncomfortable asking as yourself. Or if you feel comfortable asking on the forum, go right ahead. But until then, I'm just going to tee up our last question for our panelists, and really just kind of bringing full circle this conversations across generations. I would like to ask the panelists, based on your experiences, what would you share with LGBTQ youth today? So whoever wants to go first, please do.
I'm seeing that Meredith has some words coming out of her mouth already.
I was just thinking about what you had just said, Wheels, on the last question of finding people who make you feel like you aren't an island. And I think one thing that I would say to youth today, there's more people than ever, more youth than ever are identifying as LGBTQIA+. And at the same time, we're seeing, you know, double, triple, quadruple levels of state legislative attacks on youth. And so it's time where there, in my opinion, it feels like there are across generations a lot of disconnect. And so I think one thing that that I would like to share with youth and talk to them about is, you know, for me at least, I struggled a lot in coming out because I was really afraid of letting people down, and had a lot of internalized shame around that. And really, once I did come out, not that everything was rosy and perfect from there, but I think that was such an important step of just letting go of some of the fears that I had around letting others down. And really, once I took that step, I felt so much more at peace with myself. And so, you know, finding people that support you and finding ways that you feel safe to live your truth is definitely, I think, the most powerful thing that people can do in the way that feels safe and comfortable for them. So I would hope that youth would be able to see that path and find who affirms them and how they feel comfortable moving around in the world.
I would simply say it's okay, and you're still loved. I mean, I wish people had said that to me my whole life, right? It's okay.
I think for me, it's hard for me to give youth advice because I can say, you know, be your own role model, be confident in yourself, don't be afraid. Those are all things I think you can say to youth, but it's way, way deeper than that. I think I would rather tailor my advice to everyone else, because I don't think the problem is the youth. I don't know if I really have the experience to give advice. I think I would rather say everyone should open everyone with open arms. I mean, the assumptions, the prejudice has never helped anyone. And I think as long as you are always approaching people with kindness, and you're always approaching especially LGBTQIA youth with kindness, I think that will be extremely impactful throughout their entire lives. Because man, I wish I knew at 6 years old that gay people existed, because that would have made a huge, huge impact. And again, offering your kids exposure. I think it's amazing. You should bring your kids to the Pride Parade. You should experiences, especially with the LGBTQIA plus community, because that is something I think would have been very life-changing for me at a young age.
Yeah.
Any final comments?
Yeah, I mean, you've all made such wonderful points. One thing that I'm thinking of is I think about my experience, and my professional experiences honestly have impacted me so much personally, because I've worked in elementary schools and had facilitated an LGBTQ club in a middle school and high school. And I also currently work with folks who are in their 80s who are LGBTQ. So I've gotten this amazing experience to interact with folks from really across generations. And I just think it's so inspiring. I think that, number one, there's sometimes this assumption that like, it's these things are just like trends or fads, or, I even hold for myself. Sometimes I hear about things like neo-pronouns and I'm like, oh, what's that? Like, or, like new different identities. And I'm like, oh, is that just the thing the kids are talking about? And it's like, no, definitely not. The kids hold so much hope for us. The youth hold so much hope in terms of there's so much groundbreaking discoveries and ways of shattering binaries and shattering rigid ways of thinking about things. And also older generations did that as well. And it's not just something for youth, but for folks really across the lifespan. So I don't know if that's actually answering the question, but I'm just holding like the inspiration from folks across generations, and maybe that's a way to wrap that up.
Well, Giselle, we actually did have an anonymous question come in directed towards you. It says, I'm non-binary. I've been inspired to actually come out and live my actual self at Prove. Nerve-wracking, but my pronouns are they, them. How did you come out to coworkers with alternative pronouns? Is there any suggestions you have to breach the subject?
It's a really good question. I will be honest. First of all, number one, thank you for asking that question. Congrats to you for coming out and taking that step. I will be completely honest with you that there are times when I wonder if the reason that I use she, he, they pronouns is to kind of create this buffer for folks who would struggle with they, them, because I do prefer they, them. It's hard because many folks really struggle with they, them. And I encounter this, my person who I'm dating right now uses they, them pronouns, and my friends butcher their pronouns. And it's always this like, oh, that's so hard. And I see people's pronouns being butchered and I'm like, oh, do I want to always be struggling with this? Like, do I correct folks or do I not? So I hold that it's a lot. Definitely be kind to yourself in whatever decisions you make, whether you make a decision to correct someone or whether you decide, you know what, today I'm just not going to, if I'm going to get misgendered, I might just let it slide today. I think be kind to yourself, because even things like figuring out which bathroom to use, that's like a daily decision that trans and non-binary folks have to make. And depending, and of course it depends on the folks. I think I hold a lot, in a sense of privilege, in a sense not. I think visibility is an interesting question. I think for me, I'm not as visible as a non-binary person, as I have not been medically transitioning, and people just assume I'm a woman. And so in a way, I just can be like, oh, I'll just use the female restroom, or I'll just, let people gender me as a woman. And that creates, in a sense, an ease. On the other hand, I don't feel seen. And there's a flip side where maybe some folks who are more visibly non-binary or more visibly trans might feel more seen, but also opens them up for more discrimination, for more misgender, for more making difficult decisions. So yeah, number one, I would just holding space for yourself, being proud of yourself for taking that step. And I think that's the best advice I could say. It's hard.
I'd like to add something to that, and I agree. Congratulations for making that decision. It's a hard one, and you should be really proud of yourself. You have a community here of support, and whether it's from straight folks or gay folks or other non-binary folks in Prove, but I just personally want to offer that I would be happy to, if you wanted to share who you are with me personally, to change the pronouns that I use when I'm interacting with you. And then, perhaps other people will hear that and adopt that as well. So, I just want to put that out there. Maybe if you were comfortable letting Chase, myself, and Lexi know, we can start using the pronoun and help to make that part of the conversation and the adoption. So totally up to you, just putting it out there.
Yeah, I'm just gonna de-anonymize myself if you guys can hear me. This is Wendy Yakovich. Yeah, that question actually came from me. This has been something I've been struggling with for the last year or so on whether or not I come out to work or not. So I just want to say, Giselle, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed everything that I've been even feeling. Hell, even just going to the bathroom at the office, I'm just like, this doesn't feel like the correct door to me. So, man, wow. Thank you for that.
And we're here.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I think we're coming up to time there. Thank you. And Wendy, that was brave for you just then. I think we admire you for the honesty. So congratulations for doing that. And you'll get the support that you need from the Prove folks. I think my camera just froze maybe. Did it just freeze?
It did.
Oh, there you go. And let me just do this. Hold on 2 seconds. Back again. There you go. Well, look, thank you all for the panelists for attending. What a powerful conversation. Meredith, Giselle, thank you so much for joining and learning about Prove and what we're trying to take on our journey here in this area. And Lexi, you know, great leadership on the Diversity Council, and of course, Will's, you know, the advocate that you are, and we look to you on many fronts to do different things for us as an organization. And Chase, thank you as well. Look, I've been educated here. I think a number of people who have listened in today have been educated, and we continue this journey. And frankly, back to the point earlier, it's not about the month of June. It's about, you know, every day in the year, and we offer that transparency, and we want to support and grow together and learn. So thank you all again, and hopefully we can continue this conversation soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.